Look at this little stone building 30 paces from the main house. Inside sits a cast iron stove, and inside it a fire is roaring. It's noon, early July, and outside it's pushing 100 degrees. But in the main house, where the family sleeps and eats, it's 15 degrees cooler than wherever you're sitting right now. No air conditioner. No $200 power bill. The fire just burns somewhere other than where people live. Now look at yourself. You're sitting in a house sealed up tight, the air conditioner droning from May to September, and still, by 3 in the afternoon, the kitchen turns into an oven. You open the fridge just to stand in front of it for a minute. And you've been told this is simply how it is, that you beat the summer heat with money and electricity. The old folks didn't see it that way. For more than 100 years, the Amish built a separate summer kitchen right beside the house, and they knew exactly why. Then, sometime after the 1920s, they stopped building them. One by one, those little buildings became woodsheds, storage sheds, nothing at all. And nobody ever explained to you why. They knew something you don't, and because it was forgotten, your own house works against you every single summer. My name is Amos. I grew up in a house that still had one of these summer kitchens standing, laid up from sandstone by my great-grandfather's hands, with its own chimney and a thick oak door. That door was 2 hands thick, bound in black iron, and in summer the damp would swell it so tight that it closed with a low wooden groan I can still hear today. Today I'm going to walk you through one summer day, from 5 in the morning until dark, and show you 5 things the old folks used to keep a house cool. Almost none of them cost a cent. The first one you can do tonight, right in your own kitchen, without buying a thing. But I'm saving the most important part for the end. The very reason summer kitchens were built at all, the modern world got it exactly backwards. Every single day we do the opposite of what they did, and we pay for it on every bill. What exactly got turned upside down, I'll tell you at the very end. Stay with me. This is the thing they stopped teaching. 5 in the morning. A summer day at my grandmother Rebecca's didn't start with breakfast, it started with a fire, but not in the house. While the mist still hung in the valley and the air held around 60 degrees, she was already splitting kindling and firing up the stove in that very summer kitchen, 30 paces off. By 5:30 the chimney was already smoking. Bread baked in there, 8 loaves at a time in the cast iron belly of the stove, kettles boiled, and all through July and August the canning went on. In a single summer nearly 400 jars of tomatoes, beans, and peaches passed through her hands. A cast iron wood stove drives the air around it up past 100 degrees, and it keeps the room a furnace for another 3 hours after the fire's gone out. Lay your palm on its side at noon and you'll burn yourself on cold iron. My grandmother simply never let that heat into the place where people lived. Here's what you can do tonight, for free. Find the hottest thing in your house, the oven, the stove, and on a July evening, don't turn it on inside. Take the cooking out onto the porch, to the grill, out on the back deck. That one habit lifts a whole source of heat out of the house. Heat your air conditioner would otherwise spend all night hauling back out on your dime. You're not fighting the heat. You're just not letting it in. But taking the fire outside is only half the morning's work. The coolest air of the whole day is standing right there in your yard at dawn, and the old folks caught it. By 5 in the morning it's around 60 degrees outside, the walls cooled off overnight. My grandfather Jeremiah, at that hour, would walk barefoot around the house through the dew-wet grass and open everything, windows on the east side, windows on the west, the transoms above the doors, those narrow little panels, a hand high, set above the frame on purpose so hot air could escape up top. For an hour and a half, cold night air blew straight through the house, and it smelled of cut clover from the far field. And by 9, when the sun was already starting to burn, he'd walk back through and seal it all tight, windows, shutters, doors. And the house stood all day like a root cellar, holding the night's cool inside. Do this tomorrow. Don't wait until it's stifling to throw the windows open in the dead of the heat, that's exactly the mistake. Open everything at 5 or 6 in the morning, let the cold air pass through, and by 9 close it up and draw the shades on the south side. You'll be amazed how much longer the house stays cool without a single machine. Now that we're locking the cool inside the stone, come down with me. Under the house hides the second half of the trick. Where I grew up there was a cellar with stone walls 2 hands thick, and in it, all year round, January or July, it held around 55 degrees. You'd go down 7 worn steps, and by the 4th one the cold reached up for you, like a door had opened onto another season. The earth, down deep, doesn't know it's summer up above. Down there stood milk in clay crocks, butter, wheels of cheese the size of a cartwheel, and in the worst of the heat the children and old women would go down there to sort beans. That thick stone the old folks didn't call insulation, they called it mass, a material that heats up so slowly it simply never catches up over the course of a day. That's why the stone and brick houses of the Amish stayed cool. The walls soak up the heat like a sponge soaks water, and only give it back come nightfall. You probably don't have a cellar, but the principle works above ground too. Soak a heavy cotton sheet, wring it out, and hang it in a window on the shady, north side where there's a draft. The air, passing through the wet cloth, gives up its heat to evaporation and comes into the room noticeably cooler. That's how people kept food, and themselves, cool long before there was any electricity. Cost, $0 and 1 bucket of water. But stone and wet cloth will only hold the cool if the outside is helping. And here the old folks weren't thinking about the house, they were thinking about the whole yard. Walk up to any old farm and look at where the big trees stand. It's no accident. A tall walnut or maple was planted on the south and west sides, that's where the noon and evening sun hits, the meanest of it. My great-grandfather planted a black walnut over our roof the year he married, in 1884. By the time I was a child, 3 men couldn't join hands around it, and in its shade the ground stood a good 10 degrees cooler than the open yard 2 steps away. A grown tree over the roof is a living canopy, and that shade doesn't cost a cent, and every year it only gets thicker. The house itself was set with its long side to the evening breeze, and cut with those very transoms over the doors so hot air went up and out while cool air was drawn in down low. The house breathed on its own, without a fan. You can't grow a tree in an evening, but you can shade a window that's taking the sun by tomorrow, with an awning, a canopy, a trellis of climbing green on the side where the sun goes down. And open your windows crosswise, 1 low on the windward side, 1 high on the leeward side. You'll do exactly what these houses did all by themselves. Now lift your eyes to noon, to the very worst of it, where all this science gets tested for real. At 1 in the afternoon on the 12th of July, when the thermometer on the north wall read 98 and the heat shimmered over the corn, Rebecca's summer kitchen held the hottest air of the whole day. The stove hadn't gone out since dawn, laundry boiled in a copper kettle, apple butter bubbled over a slow fire, the kind you have to stir with a wooden paddle for 3 hours without stopping, or it scorches. Sweat ran down their backs, you could wring out their shirts. But the whole family, 14 of them, didn't sit down to eat there. They were called into the main house, into the walnut-shaded dining room, where behind windows sealed since 9 in the morning it was quiet and cool as a church. The hot bread was carried over from across the yard, wrapped in linen. And so all the heat of noon, the meanest hour of the day, was borne 30 paces off and never once crossed the threshold of the home. But noon passes, and here's where it gets most delicate, the evening. Around 7, when the sun dropped behind the barn and long shadows stretched across the yard, the fire in the summer kitchen wasn't doused with water, the coals were raked into a pile and banked under ash, buried like a seed, so that in the morning it could be fanned back to life in a minute, without wasting kindling. The stove cooled slowly all night, giving its heat to an empty stone building where no one slept. And at that same hour, grandfather made his rounds of the house again and threw open everything he'd sealed at 9 that morning. Over the day the sandstone walls had soaked up exactly as much heat as they gave back at night, and now they had to be aired out clean, so that by morning they'd be cold again. At sundown the house breathed out what it had stored all day, like a man after hard work. The very same stone that locked in the cool in the morning let out the heat in the evening. Nothing got switched on. They just knew the hour. Stop for a second and answer yourself honestly. Better yet, write it in the comments. How hot did your house get last summer, and which room was the most unbearable? The kitchen. The upstairs bedroom right under the roof. Name it. Because here's the bet nobody talks about: you pay twice. Once, when you buy the machine that fills the house with heat. And again, every month, when you buy the electricity to drive that heat back out. The old folks never paid once. Now let's go back to that stone building from the beginning, the summer kitchen. We've circled it for a whole day. It's time to step inside. They set it 20 to 30 feet from the house, close enough to carry the food, far enough that the heat and sparks never reached the walls. Its own stove, its own chimney, its own hearth. All summer, the hot, sweaty, smoky work, the baking, boiling soap from lion fat, boiling laundry, canning hundreds of jars, went out there. And the main house, over all those months, was never once heated from the inside. Not once. And here's the upside-down thing you stayed for. The summer kitchen was never about cooking. It was about keeping the heat from ever being born where people live. The old folks didn't cool the house, they kept the source of heat outside, and there was nothing left to cool. Everything we call fighting the heat, they simply erased from the equation with one stone building. Now look at what we do. We take a tightly insulated, hermetically sealed box. We put an oven inside it, a stove, a dryer, a dishwasher, computers, a dozen sources of heat. We diligently generate all that heat in the very heart of the house. And then we buy a machine and pay it every month to pump back outside the heat we let in ourselves. First we create the problem inside four walls, then we buy the cure for it. The old folks simply never let the sickness across the threshold. That's why they stopped building summer kitchens. Not a conspiracy, money and convenience. The electric stove came, and right behind it, by the end of the 40s, home air conditioning, and a separate building started to seem like a waste. Why walk 30 paces in the rain with a kettle in your hands when you can cook right there in the kitchen and just blow the heat away at the push of a button? One machine created the heat inside, the other sold you deliverance from it. They say summer kitchens simply went out of fashion. They stopped drawing them into the plans, tore them down for firewood, turned them into chicken coops. And along with the building, they forgot the very idea: it's easier to keep heat out than to drive it out later. Now put it all together in one picture. The fire, out the door, in its own place. The windows, flung open at dawn, at 60 degrees, and shut tight by 9 in the morning. Thick stone and wet cloth, holding the nights cool the way a cellar holds its 55. Trees and a draft, taking the blow of the sun from outside. The heat of noon cooking 30 paces off, not at your table. The walls breathing it out at sunset, when the sun goes down. And at the heart of it all, the simple rule of the summer kitchen: don't cool the house, keep the heat where you don't live. It's not a bag of tricks, it's one system, and the whole of it hangs on a single nail. Do just one thing tonight, the simplest one. Find the hottest source of heat in the house and don't turn it on inside during the heat. Take the cooking out to the porch. That's already a little summer kitchen, your own, for $0. And answer me in the comments: how hot did your house get last summer, and which room was the most unbearable? Name it, I'm reading. And next time, I'll take you down into that very stone cellar under the old house and show you how, all year round, without a single outlet, they kept food fresh for weeks, and what they sold you instead, so you'd forget it. I'm Amos. And now you know it too.